Hi, I'm Eliot from Magoosh, and in this video, we're going to be thinking about IELTS Writing Task 2. This is one of the tasks on the IELTS exam that students worry about most because the writing section is hard, and writing is something that students spend a lot of time on and a lot of time worrying about. I want to give you my top 5 tips to help you do as well as you can on this very difficult part of the IELTS exam. So let's start with the first one. And we're going to start with one of the things that can really get your essay off to a great start. And that is the introduction part of your response. So in your introduction, you need to do basically 2 things. One is you need to paraphrase what the question says. And by paraphrasing, I mean you need to take what the question is asking you to do, the language in the question, and put it in your own words, okay? Doing that is a way that you're going to introduce the topic of your essay. And then your essay needs a thesis statement. Now, what's a thesis statement? Maybe you haven't taken writing classes before. Thesis statement is very simple. You need to present your perspective on the essay question very clearly, right at the beginning of your essay. Every good Task 2 essay will have your perspective on the essay question stated very, very clearly in the introduction. Now, this isn't easy to do. It takes some practice, okay? And later I'll give you some ideas about where you can look and where you can turn to learn about thesis statements and introductions more. But tip number 1 is master the skill of writing a good introduction, because that's how you're going to get your essays off to a great start. Okay, and then tip number 2, what comes after your introduction? It's your body paragraphs. And using paragraphs effectively is my second tip in order to do really well on the IELTS exam. You need a focused and clear response for Task 2. And that means that you've organized your ideas, your perspective, into clear and logical paragraphs. Okay, so a paragraph should be about one basic main idea, and you use details and reasons, descriptions, whatever it is you're writing about to talk about that one focused idea in each paragraph, all right? One thing I see in student essays all the time is that the focus kind of wanders off, and there's not a very clear focus in each body paragraph on the one point that the writer is trying to make. So learning how to use paragraphs is an important skill, and you need to make sure you understand how to organize your body paragraphs in your Task 2 essay. Okay, again, at the end of this video, I'm going to share some resources for you on how you can learn more about paragraphing. But that's my second tip for Task 2, is learning how to use paragraphs well and effectively to write a clear response for Task 2. Okay, the third tip, you need to use detail in your writing in Task 2. So what am I talking about here? Well, one of the easy things you can do in your body paragraphs in particular is to use lots of examples, right? When you make a point, you're making an argument or sharing your perspective in the paragraph, in response to the prompt that you're writing about, you can make that point. It's going to be a general sort of argument usually. And then you follow it with a sentence, for example, or for instance, and you give some more detail about that topic. Okay, that's one way you should be adding detail to your body paragraphs. And by the way, a lot of students have a difficult time figuring out what to say in their essays and getting enough words and enough language in their description within the time frame that they give you. Adding details and examples about your main point is a very easy and straightforward way to add words to your response, add length to your response. But not only that, it makes your writing better and clearer because you're giving the reader a better idea of what you mean. But there are other ways you can build in detail as well, using lots of descriptive words, those adjectives and adverbs that you've learned. Use those and use them to describe your ideas in your response for Task 2. You can always also add explanation, further explanation for your ideas. So it doesn't have to be examples. It can be simply going into more depth and describing your idea in more detail. You may use details that you know about, examples from your life, from things you've read in newspapers, magazines, things you've read online. You can use these examples you can use this description in your Task 2 essay. It's perfectly fine to do, and you will not be counted down for that. In fact, you'll be rewarded for all the details that you provide. So the third tip here is to just think about how you can add details. Don't just write one general point after another. Think about how you can explain what you mean with a lot more depth and a lot more detail in your Task 2 essay. All right, a fourth tip for your Task 2 essays is to make sure that you are varying your vocabulary and your grammar. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, for vocabulary, varying your vocabulary means that you are trying very hard to avoid redundancy. Redundancy is when you use the same words or phrases over and over throughout your essay. You need to try, as you're writing, to say things in different ways. In particular, you need to try not to say any of the words that were provided to you in the prompt for the question. You need to use your own language, paraphrasing, using your own words to describe anything that was mentioned in the question prompt. But then also look through your essay and make sure you're not using the same words over and over and over again. Doing that will make it seem like you have a very limited vocabulary. And one of the main scoring criteria for IELTS essays is how much range or how wide is your vocabulary. So you want to show that off in your writing. You want to make sure you're not using the same words over and over and over again in your writing, but you're varying your vocabulary. And it's very similar for grammar. You want to show off your grammar skills. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to write long, complicated sentences every time. What it means is that you need to use different sentence patterns in your responses. So you don't always want to have very simple, short sentences with your subject and your verb in a very predictable order. You want to mix things up. Use transition words and phrases, right? You can put those at the beginning of the sentence and it will help you use a different sentence pattern, right? You want to make sure that some of your sentences are longer and complex. You're using some more complex grammatical structures to join two clauses together, join two sentences together into one, right? You're using commas with conjunctions and all those other things you learned in your grammar class. You want to be able to show them off. The point is, you don't want to have the same sentence patterns over and over and over throughout your essay. You need to vary things. Varying your grammar and your vocabulary show the grader that you have really strong skills and that you have a range of vocabulary and grammar skills that you can use to communicate. And that's what they reward by giving you a great score. The fifth tip is that you need to focus on pacing when you're practicing your Task 2 essays. So you know that you only have an hour for the entire section, Task 1 and Task 2. So since Task 2 is worth twice the points that Task 1 is worth, you need to spend twice the time on that. So that breaks down very simply into about 40 minutes that you should spend on your Task 2 essay. That's not a lot of time to write a 5-paragraph essay to a prompt that you just read a couple of minutes ago, right? You only have a very short amount of time to plan and then to actually write your response and hopefully have some time at the end in order to review your response one time and look for grammar and spelling errors and other things like that. So timing is absolutely critical as you're practicing your Task 2 essays. Every time you do a practice response, you should set a timer for yourself and really understand how quickly you can write the essay and what time issues you may actually face on the exam, right? Are you going to run out of time because you don't have enough to say? Or are you, some students I have end up writing way too much. They can write really, really, really quickly, but what they've written is not as well organized as it should be, right? That's a different kind of problem. So everybody has different timing issues. You need to get familiar with what you are capable of doing within 40 minutes and trying to organize your time so that you have a couple of minutes to plan, 2 or 3 minutes to plan your response, the rest of the time devoted to writing, except for a few minutes at the end in order to check over your response. Practice that every single time you're working on Task 2, and by the time you get to the exam, you'll be very familiar and comfortable with the timing you need in order to finish this very difficult task successfully. Okay, to learn even more about everything we've talked about in this video, we have a great resource for you down below. It's a complete guide to Task 2. It's in the description that you see down there, and it's going to give you much more detail about absolutely every topic that we mentioned here today. Talking about timing, talking about how to organize your essays, how to think through the grammar and vocabulary issues you may be having. All of that is in there for you in that resource. So go check that out. And if you like this video, you can also check out these other videos, which will help you go even further in depth into the IELTS exam and understand what you need to know in order to do your best. Okay, we'll see you in the next video.